We're live. All right. Good morning, everybody. It's April 3rd, 10 a.m. I have the pleasure of being in Naples, Florida for Easter weekend. So hopefully no one will hear my four kids in the background or my wife as they eat breakfast. I want to welcome Muyibat Adelani, who I've gotten to know at ACA. She was the chairman of the Diversity Advisory Board and worked together for the past half a decade or so. And as many of you know, I write a lot on robotics and technology. And one of the things we've talked about is what it's doing for trainees and other people. Just want to get Muyibat's thoughts. She wrote a really well done article in the Journal of Bone and Joint Surgery. Last year, right? Towards the end of last year, I think 2025.
It came out in January.
Yeah, perfect. So, really insightful article, and we want to talk about that today. But first of all, let me have Muyibat introduce yourself. Tell us a little about yourself. Where you're from, med school, residency, fellowship, practice, all that good stuff. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. So I was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri, and I practice here. I've been in practice for going on 12 years now. I did medical school at Vanderbilt, residency at WashU, fellowship at Stanford, and then I've been back in St. Louis.
Excellent. So let's dive right in and talk about this great article. So the first thing you start out with by saying is the premise that everyone sort of says this, and I hear it all the time: robots are here to stay. Talk about that. I mean, it's kind of like you lead into that, and we do hear that all the time, especially from our people at our podium, right?
Definitely. I think we societally have a bias towards technology. We assume that moving forward means some level of adding technology to it. And we also believe that once we have the technology, we don't have the ability to go back.
It's like you're there, we have it, so it must be right. You're saying, right,
It
but we
must
don't
it
critically
must be
think it.
right. And also, why would we want to go back? I think there is that element of why would we want to go back? You hear a lot of people say, adapt or die. This is the way it is.
Yeah, you even hear some of our older mentors in our profession, the hip and knee profession, will get up the podium and they'll say, "Well, I know robots are here. I don't use it, but I know it's here to stay. It's coming. It's the future. We're all going to be using it." But it's a very interesting question because robots have been out for a decade. If they're saying that they're going to be using it, but yet they're not using it, it's an interesting paradigm, right? But they seem to acknowledge that it must be the future, right? I've always thought it doesn't make any sense. You can say, "Well, I don't use it currently."
I think it's interesting that people say that it's here to stay as if we have no choice, right? Like other adaptations, like people will compare it to dinosaurs. Well, dinosaurs didn't adapt and they died. Well, they died relative to natural occurrences. In a profession requires stewardship, and we decide what the profession is. It doesn't just happen without our consent or our control.
No doubt, no doubt. That's a great point. So one of the things you mentioned is, does new technology always equal progress? And assessing that, I think, is important. What kind of questions should we be asking about robotics in the healthcare field? And one of the things I've been talking a lot about recently when the Straker hack occurred is the fact that we didn't invest a lot in cybersecurity ahead of time, and so all these robotics are starting to become interconnected up into the cloud because data is too expensive to hold, locally, and that's clearly happening. And it's interesting to me that we didn't really even do a good job of evaluating that. So, what metrics do we need to look at to say, in your opinion, okay, yes, this is a step forward with progress?
I think you have to start with the question, not start with the technology. I think a lot of times we create technology that we're capable of creating, and then we look for a problem to solve. Instead, we should define the problem and define what next steps would look like. What would advancement look like here? And then go create the solution.
Yeah, I agree. So, in the case of robotics and knee replacement surgery, let's get granular about it. The problem, and we used to hear this all the time. The problem was that some patients didn't do really well after knee replacement, right? But
Right.
many people did really, really well. So the premise, I would, assume, is that introduce robots and more people do better, right? Is that, I
Hmm.
mean, and how would you assess the patient's doing better? That's an interesting question.
Well, that's a great question, right, for starters. But even a step back, let's just go back to the original question, patients don't do well. We're making the assumption that they don't do well because of alignment.
That's right. That's right.
I don't know
That's
that
right.
that has been proven, right? So we've taken a problem that we are capable of fixing because we have a technology that can address alignment, even though we don't necessarily know alignment is the problem, nor do we know what the actual alignment should be, right? We don't know what the target is.
I've been saying that for 10 years, but if we don't know the target, the technology the technology doesn't have much value. And you're exactly right. A robot allows more precise implantation to a target. If you don't know the target, can't really prove. And it's interesting. Robots in our field, your and I field of particularly of knee replacement, has been out for over a decade now. And it's interesting that to me, I'm interested in your thoughts on this, that a technology can be out for 10 years and it not move the needle. And it hasn't moved the needle. And I don't think there's been a single study objectively that wasn't biased that says it's moved the needle. Do you agree with that?
Not that I'm aware of, right? Nothing
Yeah,
that is significantly different than anything else.
yeah, I would agree. And the other premise here is, and I want your thoughts on this. Robotic platforms sit on navigation, but the robot arm just replaces our arm. The navigate you could get the same gain, I would assume, with your own tactile cutting through a block, but the navigation tells you where to where to cut. If the premise that the target was beginning to be known. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that. I wonder whether the movement from navigation to robotics is just another example of this need for progress, right? We
Yeah.
need to create something different to imply that there is progress, and then people will naturally assume the progress is there without asking any questions.
No, I think you're right. You're right. You're potentially right because navigation's been out for 25 years, right? And there
Mhm.
there are some studies. All right, let's go back to your premise. Navigation and robotics have not moved the needle in orthopedics in particular. We'll speak generally here in a little bit more about robotics in general. Um, where, but if we haven't moved the needle, is it because we don't know the target? If we know the target, will the robots or navigation allow us to improve if we know the alignment?
If we knew that, then it would allow us to improve alignment. But we still
Right,
haven't addressed the question of whether alignment is the problem.
right. We
And
would
I
have to
think we got
prove
to
that
take
the
that step.
alignment. I agree. We have to prove that the alignment equals better outcomes for patients. Right. That's
Right.
the step. It's interesting. We have some early data. We have some data that we published over the same time period, the last 10 years, where we could tell ranges but not exact targets. So if we had a varus knee or and we when we were done with it, patients who either remained in a little bit of varus or were neutral did better than those that we overcorrected into valgus. And the same
Mhm.
thing. The premise is, and I already know how I feel about this, do you have to have a robot to at least take that step forward?
I guess my question would be, well, number one, as you point out, it does not necessarily, well, the current data does not suggest that we need to hit one target. We need
That
to
is
hit
exactly
a
right.
tight range,
That's
right?
right.
So,
That's right.
so to me, that questions the whole premise of any kind of enabling technology, which is exactness, that we need to have an exact answer. We just need to get in the range.
Yeah.
And for
Yeah.
me, So it begs the question, and I think it's important for all surgeons considering this to answer this question: what exactly is surgery to you? So, surgery to me is a creative endeavor, it's an art. Other people may say surgery is a science where we are trying to hit some exact thing. To me, the art of surgery and the fun of it is trying to get to that target.
Yeah. It's almost like the tech is taking something from you a little bit.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm right with you. And I think as we get better with our targets, I think things that allow us to hit it better will work. I believe with manual instrumentation. Now in full disclosure, I use navigation on my femur for knees. I use computer navigation only because I can't see the femoral head, and I don't like drilling a hole in the femur. Showed it saved about a gram of hemoglobin in a study we did years ago. So I use it for those two reasons. But I still do everything else manually. I believe that I can take a varus limb and keep it in varus and not overcorrect it to valgus just with those, because I can see the tibia. I can My computer navigation tells me that what my alignment is on the femur, and so then I know with confidence that I can do that. So for me, it's been a, does a robot make me do that better? Without your comment, without knowing that I don't have to be perfectly exact, because our implants make up for it. I mean, I don't have to be perfect. I need to be close enough, right?
Mhm. That's a really, really important point, though, with respect to why we tend to aggressively adopt technology. Is technology comes with the bias that technical calculation or exactness is better than subjectivity. It's better than human judgment. And because we believe that inherently, that's why we end up adopting these things so quickly. But the
No, I agree.
problem is when you start believing that, you also believe that it's better than you, right? What you just said earlier is, I am confident that I can make a straight leg with instrumentation.
Yep.
But that confidence is not something you're born with, that's something that was built through experience.
That's true. I would agree with
And
that.
if you change the way you train people with a device that now requires you to trust the device more than you trust yourself, will you be able to develop that confidence?
Well, I'm glad you hit that, because that was next on my list to ask you about, was the word trust. We'll talk training in a minute. You bring up an interesting point in your paper, which is what you just mentioned, which is trusting the tech and then starting to trust it more than you trust yourself. I think that is potentially a scary place. But comment more about that. And do you see that as we adopt technology being an issue, a problem?
It's totally a problem, and it's a problem that we've seen over and over again, right? How many times have you heard stories of people following their GPS even though they know it's wrong?
Yeah,
They
yeah, yeah.
follow it to some dead end street, even though the whole time they were like, this didn't seem right, this didn't seem right, and they will follow
That
it
is so
because it's
true.
the computer. We have to recognize that that is our bias, but we also have to recognize that confidence is an important trait of a surgeon. Right. I
Yeah,
think that sometimes we don't actually acknowledge that because we believe this is a science. Well, if you just do the steps right, if you just put it in the right alignment, put the components in the right position, then it'll be fine. But that's not really what we're doing. Like, to me, the most important attributes of a surgeon with respect to the act of surgery is the ability to read and react to what you see and the ability to trust yourself. But when you add technology to that, you have to defer that trust to the technology. Otherwise, it's not worth using, right? If you don't trust the technology, instead of doing the surgery, you will spend that time arguing with the technology. I found that when I first tried handheld navigation, I was constantly arguing with it because I just didn't agree with what I saw. And I was like, this is kind of pointless. So you have to,
right.
if it's going to be useful to you, if it's going to be something that is comfortable to use, you have to trust it. Otherwise, it's going to be a nuisance. But you have to ask yourself, what is that trust doing? Where is that trust coming from? And it's being deferred from yourself.
Yeah, it's a great point you bring up. I love the GPS. I love the GPS analogy. I hope you're okay. I'm going to use that sometime.
It's fine.
But I mean, the fact that you drive and you're like, we're in a dead end street. But if we play that if we play that a step forward, you ending up at the wrong address is far different than what can happen when you have a patient. And for you and I, who are surgeons, a patient who's let themselves be vulnerable enough to be treated by you, a mistake could be far more costly. I think we
Right.
would both agree.
Right. I
Right.
totally agree.
And that's that's where someone recently, it was an AI, a cybersecurity expert, and I were texting back and forth, communicating back and forth, and he used the phrase "pump the brakes" on technology. And I wonder if you think, is it time? Should we be pumping the brakes a bit more on some of the technology that we're deploying in healthcare, in medicine?
At the risk of sounding like a curmudgeon, I will say yes. Right.
You know, you're
But I will
talking
say,
about it. You're fine. It's all good.
I will say yes with the caveat that we have evidence, right?
Yeah.
So you and I are both old enough to remember the rollouts of EMR and all these problems that it was supposed to solve.
Yeah.
And what we didn't ask at that time was, what about the problem it's going to add?
Yeah.
That's what we need to do with respect to technology and surgery, is say, okay, this is the purported benefits of this technology, but what are we at risk of losing? And are those things worth losing for whatever we think we might gain?
Great point. Let's talk about what we might be at risk for losing. Let's talk about surgical skill. Um, you bring up a number of good points about trusting the technology, and as you trust, that trust comes away from you. Do you think that the adoption of robotic technology in surgery in general will make us less skillful? You write about that a fair amount in your article. What are your thoughts around that?
I think it will necessarily make us less skillful. The first major skill we lose is obvious, which is how to use other instruments, right? So if we make ourselves a one trick pony and we don't have access to that for whatever reason, we will not be able to finish surgery. And there are anecdotes all around the country of people canceling or aborting primary
That is true.
joints, because the robot doesn't work or is not available that day. And we have to ask ourselves, is that what we really want in our profession? To cancel a otherwise relatively simple case because technology isn't available.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. We have a fellowship interview, about 40 people a year, and we just got done with ours not that long ago, and we heard that over and over again, that they all were aware of cases, some of which had been in cases where the computer went down. They canceled every case that day. So it's interesting, people have taken their entire lives, taken their entire taken their entire lives, moved it around. Like, when you get ready for hip and ear replacement, your family's involved or taking off work, whatever. And then can you imagine 6 cases that day, 6 families? You tell them, sorry, we can't do your surgery because the robot isn't working or
Right.
whatever, right? And
Right.
and I think if you give up your skill, then you have to make that call, right? I mean, but I think that's the scariest thing about all this, is turning our skill over to the technology, almost with blind trust. You know what I'm saying? That's
Yes.
scary to me.
And I think people will say this is dramatic, right? We've
Yeah,
we've
yeah, yeah,
turned
yeah.
over other skills to technology all the
Yes.
time. But in medicine, we have very real examples of this. I talk to my general surgery colleagues all the time. New general surgeons only know how to operate laparoscopically. And if they need to open the belly, they don't know how.
It's certainly
That's
not.
dangerous,
It's
right?
very dangerous. Very dangerous.
Um,
Yep.
The second really important skill of a surgeon is creativity. Again, I just told you, I think of this as a creative endeavor, but even if you don't, creativity is a necessary skill in many technical skills. The ability to be nimble and navigate trouble, come up with a solution to an unforeseen problem, is something that you learn through error, essentially. You have to be in a situation where you're forced to improvise in order to create creativity within yourself. If you never have to improvise because you're using robotics, then what happens when you're in a case where you have to improvise. You won't have that skill set to draw from. And so if you create a generation of surgeons that doesn't have manual skills, that doesn't have creativity, what exactly are we optimizing for?
Yeah, that I think that's a really good point because I've always said biology is not like other mechanical like I was an engineer for medicine, and engineering is very easy. F equals ma, build a building, calculate the winds. It never exceeds that. That's the structure. You do the forces. Human biology is very different. How many times do you say to yourself, oh, I've never really seen that before? Well,
Mhm.
robotic and AI driven algorithms go by what is our it processes what is known. Now everybody talks about, well, they can learn. Well, learning in the physical world, if a blood, let's take for the thing I think about all the time is if a blood vessel gets damaged, there's no way if you don't have skill, a robot's going to be able to do much. Now, I suppose in the future, a robot can quickly repair an artery, but we are like, that will not be in your and I lifetime for sure,
Right,
right? There's no
right,
way it's going to be. And the same thing for in our profession of orthopedics. How can a robot possibly do what you and I do after it can't replicate, in my opinion, tens of thousands of repetitions and seeing those unusual things. And to your point, you call it creativity, being able to see, oh, that's unusual. How am I going to be creative to get the same good outcome for that patient? Whether it's,
right,
oh, this bone wasn't the right quality. Oh, there's a defect here we couldn't appreciate on X-ray. And I think that's
right.
scary. One of the analogies I like to use is with Sully Sullenberger, who landed that plane on the Hudson.
Yes,
And I keep thinking to myself, if he didn't have all these flight years and training, when both those engines went down, could if everything we did was automated, could the automation do the same thing? And I guess you could say, well, if all those people died, maybe that's just the price of advance. To your point, that's the price of progress, right? I mean, right? I mean,
essentially. I mean, and he says that. I read in one of his books, and he says that if he learned to fly on autopilot, he would not have been able to land the plane
is that right? I didn't
because
wasn't
he
aware of that. He said that.
learned. I'll send you the book. He
I
learned
love
how to fly by gliding.
it. Fascinating.
And
Fast.
so the people we've got to think about our mentors, the people that we admire. The reason why we admire them is because they learned how to do all this stuff without the bells and whistles,
True.
right? That's what we actually admire about their ability to operate. When we say, oh, how did you know how to do that? Or where did you learn that? They learned that through error, largely. And we're
Yeah.
trying to take that away. And while we can make the argument, well, won't our patients benefit from minimizing error? In the short term, that's true. But I do think it makes for a different kind of surgeon. And you have to ask yourself, does that benefit our patients in the long term? I would argue that it does not.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting point you bring up. Does the technology make you a better surgeon? Well, without the proof, if I had two physicians to choose from and I was a patient, and this one had both skills to adapt and use technology if they needed it, but they had the skills versus the one that only used the technology, I think it's rather obvious who all of us would go to. But we don't, the collective, our profession, doesn't inform the market of that difference. There is an implication that technology means, to your point, better or
Yeah.
progress. And we're
Yes.
not really, and I think that's the part where we're probably not forthcoming. These comments of, well, it's got to be better. It's progress, right? I mean, it's got to be better. It's here to stay. Well, I think that based on, to your point, based on what and who says. I mean, that's why I keep fighting back because I really think we need to pump the brakes. Let's talk a little bit about uh, sort of training. If the premise is that technology will be here at some, and you need to maintain your skills, is how are our training because we're getting a lot of residents now who ironically come to our program because they want more manual techniques because
Mhm.
many of them have done just a fraction on on manual instruments, some almost none, which is scary to me. Have we already gone a little bit too far? What do you think about training residents? So
I think that training residents and fellows has to be conscious. You have to decide, what do I want the end product to look like? And then you have to acknowledge that the process by which you train them creates that end product. If I want to build surgeons who are confident, who are nimble, who are also aware of what's on the horizon, then I've got to create an environment that does that. That may mean a little bit of robotics, a little bit of manual, but you have to design that. You can't just do your own practice individually and then say, I hope these fellows and residents turn out the way I want. You have to be intentional about it.
I love that word intentional. That's exactly right. You know, we train them mostly on manual. They use navigation and they may use, various types. But I think whether you cut with your own arm on the guidance that you're getting with tech or whether they cut, we're going to teach them all to use their own arms. Then they can make a determination when they get out whether or not a robot is something that they want to deploy in their practice if they think the robot is better than their own arm. I'm a I'm a huge believer that our psychomotor skills, that human psychomotor skills, are far better than what people give us credit for. Highly skilled ones. I do believe they look at athletes that are at the top of their game. The
Yeah.
assumption we've done a good job of training surgeons the same. I think it can be more creative than any robotic system. What do you think?
I totally agree. If you've ever watched like somebody like Greg Maddox hit the strike zone, the fact that somebody can throw a baseball with that level of precision,
Like that is crazy,
yeah,
right?
is a product of some level of training, right? And so we train people to be the surgeons that we want them to be, but first we must acknowledge that that is the case. I think it's too far often that we think that we can do whatever we want and then the surgeons will turn out just like we did, but that's not true. We are products of the way we were trained and they will be products of the way they are trained. And so we have to be intentional about how we do that. And we also have to be cognizant as it's happening that we may need to adjust along the way. If we see a little bit too much of this, not enough of that, you have to change the recipe a little bit.
So let me ask you some direct questions. Are we Have we deployed too much tech into let's go just orthopedic hip and knee replacement right now? Have we deployed too much enabling tech? Have we gotten ahead of our skis? Do we need to pump the brakes and go back?
I think we've employed too much, but too fast.
Yes, I think that's right. Kind of technology before the evidence, right? Before the
Correct.
proof.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is interesting that we have so much trust when we don't have the proof yet. It's a very interesting. And I think that's really what you highlight. The title of your article is "The Hidden Cost of Adopting Robotic Hip and Knee Arthroplasty," and I think that's spot on. Do you think we're past the point of no return? Do you think we could scale it back?
If we want to. We have to make an active decision to do that. And we have to do that before it's too late, right? So you see now people trying to scale back social media
Yep.
when we should have done that many, many years ago, or we should have asked the right
Yeah.
questions to begin with, right? There was a time, you and I are also both old enough to remember this. Hard on hard bearings are here to stay,
Oh yeah.
right?
Oh,
If
yeah.
you're
Yeah.
not doing this, you are going to be left behind. But guess what we did? We scaled that back.
Yeah. There's no doubt. If you look at our own profession, there's technology that got adopted too fast. It went up, it peaked, and it scaled back. And there's a whole graveyard full of those. Some of which we aren't using anymore. Some of which we are, but in different. It was modified and
Right,
improved by
right,
probably asking after the fact, asking the right questions, but
right.
after the fact.
Exactly. We have the ability and more importantly, the responsibility to ask those questions earlier.
Do you think I'm fascinated by what's happening on a macroeconomic level right now with in healthcare government with the government cutbacks, the payer cutbacks? I'm having conversations in my state of Indiana routinely with surgeons looking to make moves. One of our largest groups Optum, who's a largest employer of physicians in the United States, is terminating 9 orthopedic surgeons because they say they want to divest of those who are losing too much money. This world that's changing rather rapidly, and the cost of technology. Do you think we start to see a scale back out of pure economic play, or do you think it'll continue to go up? What do you think?
I think there'll be two things at play. One is the payers are no longer going to pay for the CT scans. That'll be the easiest thing to do, right? The total ankle people see this already, where their CT scans are harder and harder to get. I think that's what the payers will do. And we already know that they're going to probably attack the code for navigation and robotics. I also
Yeah.
think on the hospital or institutional side, it will be impossible to continue to hire people who have only experience with this one robot because they're not going to get 6 robots.
It's a great point. That's a really good point. That if you trained on a particular one and then you get hired at a hospital and they're like, well, we can't afford that one. We have this other one. Or we already have this one. We're not buying 2 or 3 or 4. Then it'll sit in there and have no value.
Right.
Powerful perspective. Yeah. I think it's going to be fascinating to watch because if, as the pot of money for healthcare goes down, or let's say it stays the same, but there's more consumption of it, you have to determine value. Like we make decisions every day in our ambulatory surgery center because we own it. Do you order this many more supplies? Do you order that? I mean, we have it down to, well, do you want a antimicrobial rinse, and how much does that cost? I mean, we do this all the time, let alone some huge fancy tech that's $800 a case. Like if it wasn't that, I mean, anyone comes to us, including myself, I want to do something new in my case that's $800 per case. You better have a really, really good patient care reason why you're going to do that. I mean,
right. But if we get to the place where that's the only way they know how, we're going to be in a real big problem.
that's why that worries me, Muyibat. I'm telling you, that worries me more than anything. I think we may already have been too far. I think some of these younger surgeons are really, some of them, not all, but some of them are relatively robot dependent. And I hate to sound like a curmudgeon or a cynic, but I think there's some people that like that, right? The people that make robots, right? I mean,
Well, ultimately, there is that component. And what happens is when we start saying robotics is here to stay, it only becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
yeah. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Everybody in the room who wants that to be heard is like, yes, they're clapping. Keep saying it more, right? That's a point. Well, tell me what, in your opinion, what does the future look like? What's the next 5 years look like in robotics?
What does it look like, or what do I think it should look like? Those are two different questions, right?
Let's do both. That's a great point. What do you think it looks like first? What do you think is going to happen?
My fear is that the rapid adaptation without asking questions will continue until some tipping point. What I would prefer to see is for us to take a step back and say, we've been doing this for however many years. Do we like what's happening with our patients? Is it, to your point, is it worth it? But the second question is, what is it doing to us? Because if it is creating a different type of surgeon, we have the responsibility as a profession for deciding, is that what we want? You hear it on the podium a lot, right? Like, not just robotics is here to stay, but you see cases being presented as this has to be done with a robot. There's no other way to do it but with a robot. The robot makes me feel so much more confident. These are very dangerous statements that we
I
make
agree.
that need to be interrogated.
Interrogate is a great word. I love it. I think you're exactly right. And the latest that I'm hearing, because they keep migrating their talking points a little bit, I'd say it, is that it just makes the procedure more fun. It's easier on you. Your body gets less stressed. Apparently, when you use a robot, your heart rate goes down to like negligible. Like it's like a period of bliss in the operating room. I find that a little bit of a stretch. What do you think?
I think, these were the statements that made me want to write this. Is that when you hear people with these statements, it sounds like other types of technology addicts, phone addicts say the same thing. Oh, how could I possibly put my phone down? How could I possibly keep my child entertained without an iPad? It's only fun, right? You hear all of these things with respect to a lot of different kinds of technology, which made me feel that this is no longer about how we're doing the surgery, and it's all about how we feel about technology. And if we let how we feel about technology impact the profession, we're going to be changing the profession without even acknowledging it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we are changing the profession. And like many of the technologies we talked about, where you got over our skis, scaled it back. I think we need to scale it back. I don't think. I mean, we've deployed it too fast, and it's too. It took. I mean, all these robots initially were $1 million robots. Now they're
Mhm.
in the implants, but I think I think two things need to happen. The cost of technology has to plummet dramatically, and the evidence supporting it moving the needle. One final thing I want to ask you about, and we'll wrap it up. There's a ceiling effect in total knee replacement. Like all these people were quoting this 20% dissatisfaction, yada yada. Newer studies, everyone's starting to acknowledge, and they don't give. I never have heard anyone give it a causation, but 20% of total knee replacements are that's an exaggeration. We believe it's 10 or less, and I finally heard people at the podium saying, "Well, it's really probably 7 or 8% aren't satisfied." And I would argue that many of that can be socioeconomic or other reasons, or even psychosomatic in some patients, whether their perception of how they're doing, right? Do we have a ceiling effect? Will we be able to show? Would we be able to show a robot technology? Goes back to your original point. We're not asking the right questions. Do we even have the ability with the questions we have now to even determine whether this tech is meaningful?
I think there are a lot of challenges to determining that. One is going to be what is the outcome that we actually care about, and what is the outcome that patients actually care about? Because we're seeing the entrance of proms into a lot of
Yeah,
Medicare things and payment things. And
yeah,
when my patients are filling out proms, I don't know about yours, they complain about the questions. They're like, I don't care
yeah,
about this, that, and the third. I just want to be able to put my socks on. I just want to be able to play with my grandkids. So I think we have that issue. I think we have a research construct issue. Most studies in orthopedics are underpowered, right? Like
yeah,
to
for
be
sure.
able to show these differences is going to require so many patients. But we
Yes.
also have to ask ourselves, what are the presumptions that we're making when we even set up the question? Because we are presuming that the answer to satisfaction is the way we do the surgery. My personal opinion is it's who we pick to operate on. I think what we're trying to do, in particular with total knee replacement, is take a limited operation and spread it out to more people. But the name of the game really should be identifying who benefits from this limited operation. That's also a way to increase the satisfaction, right? Is to
Totally.
really tighten the indications. And that has nothing to do with whether you use tech or manual techniques.
I agree. Yeah, we don't put a whole lot of stock in patient satisfaction questions. We put more stock into things like, does your knee feel normal to you? Other things that did we hit the goals appropriately? Because what patients are
Yeah.
wanting. So I couldn't agree more. We got to start asking different questions.
Yep.
Muyibat, it has been an absolute pleasure. Congratulations on an amazing article. I found it awesome to read. For those on Substack, this will be recorded and be replayed. Um, Check out Muyibat's article. She's an amazing surgeon, great colleague, and thanks for your perspectives today on Substack. It's been awesome.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Have a great one.
You too.